when steel walls couldn't contain love. The first time Officer Maya Chen saw prisoner 47B collapse in the prison yard, she didn't know that moment would shatter every wall she'd built around her heart. Maya had been working at Riverside Correctional Facility for 3 years, long enough to perfect the art of emotional distance, long enough to forget that the women in orange jumpsuits were more than numbers in case files. But when she rushed through the chain-link gate that scorching August afternoon and knelt beside the unconscious woman, with dark hair splayed across the concrete like spilled ink, something ancient and undeniable stirred in her chest. The woman's name was Elena Rodriguez, serving 5 years for a crime she insisted she didn't commit. And in that moment when Maya's fingers found the racing pulse at Elena's throat, their lives became irreversibly entangled in a love story that would test every boundary between duty and desire, between right and wrong, between the person you're supposed to be and the person your heart demands you become. Maya had chosen law, enforcement the way some people choose armor as protection against a world that had hurt her too many times. Growing up in foster care had taught her that survival meant building walls, maintaining control, never letting anyone see the raw, vulnerable places inside. The uniform became her shield, the rules her religion, and the distance between herself and others became the measured space where she felt safe. She'd dated casually over the years, mostly men her family approved of, occasionally women she met at the gym or through friends, but she'd never let anyone truly in. Love seemed like a luxury she couldn't afford, a weakness she couldn't risk. The prison was perfect for someone like her, a place where emotional detachment wasn't just encouraged but required, where caring too much could get you manipulated or worse. Elena had entered Riverside with fire in her eyes and innocence written across her face like a language Maya had forgotten how to read. She'd been convicted of embezzlement from the non-profit where she'd worked as a financial coordinator, accused of stealing $200,000 meant for homeless youth programs. Elena maintained that her supervisor had framed her, that she'd discovered the theft and been silenced before she could report it. But her public defender had been overworked and underprepared, and the evidence against her had been damning. Prison had tried to break her the way it broke everyone eventually, grinding down hope until all that remained was the dull ache of survival. But Elena fought to maintain her humanity in small ways, organizing a book club in the rec room, teaching Spanish to whoever wanted to learn, volunteering for every educational program the facility offered. Maya had noticed her from a distance long before that day in the yard, noticed the way Elena moved through the hostile environment like a candle, refusing to be extinguished by the wind. After Elena's collapse, heat, exhaustion combined with undiagnosed anemia, Maya found herself volunteering for medical escort duty whenever Elena needed to visit the infirmary. She told herself it was professional concern, that she was simply ensuring the well-being of someone under her supervision. But during those walks through the institutional corridors, they began to talk. At first, it was superficial. Comments about the weather, questions about Elena's health, small observations about the daily routines. Then slowly, like ice melting, so gradually you don't notice until suddenly there's rushing water. Their conversations deepened. Elena spoke about her childhood in Santa Fe, about her mother who'd taught her that integrity was the only real currency in life, about the daughter she'd left behind with her sister, a 6-year-old named Sophia who was growing up without her. Maya found herself sharing things she'd never told anyone about the group home, where she'd spent her teenage years, about the police officer who'd shown her kindness when she was arrested for shoplifting at 15 and changed the trajectory of her life, about the loneliness that followed her like a shadow no matter how many people surrounded her. The moment Maya realized she was falling in love arrived like an earthquake, sudden, terrifying, and impossible to ignore. It was a Tuesday evening during shift change, and she'd been walking past Elena's cell during count when she heard soft singing. Elena was sitting on her bunk, eyes closed, singing a Spanish lullaby in a voice so achingly beautiful that Maya stopped breathing. The song was tender and mournful, clearly meant for the daughter Elena couldn't hold, and the raw vulnerability in every note pierced through every defense Maya had ever constructed. She stood frozen in the corridor, her heart hammering against her ribs, tears burning behind her eyes, and knew with absolute certainty that she was in love with this woman, this inmate, this impossible person who had somehow seen past her, uniform to the frightened girl still hiding underneath. The realization was devastating because Maya understood immediately that this love had no future, no acceptable path forward, no happy ending waiting at the conclusion of the story. For weeks, Maya fought against her feelings with the same discipline she'd applied to every other aspect of her life. She requested schedule changes to minimize contact with Elena. She volunteered for overtime, shifts in different blocks. She went on dates with a teacher she'd met through an app, forcing herself to smile and nod through dinners while her mind wandered to a prison cell and a woman she couldn't have. But love, Maya discovered, doesn't submit to discipline or logic or willpower. It grows in the dark like something wild and essential, feeding on stolen glances and remembered conversations, on the sound of someone's laughter echoing through concrete corridors, on the desperate human need to be seen and known by another soul. Elena, for her part, seemed to understand what was happening. Between them, without anything being spoken aloud, Maya would catch her looking, sometimes with an expression of such tender sadness that it felt like a physical touch, and in those moments, they communicated everything that could never be said. The breaking point came 6 months after that first collapse in the yard. Elena's appeal had been denied, and Maya found her sitting alone in the library after evening rec, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The protocol was clear: maintain professional distance, offer basic comfort if necessary, never make physical contact beyond what's required for security. But Maya looked at this woman she loved breaking apart in the fluorescent light, and every rule she'd ever followed suddenly seemed meaningless compared to the simple human need to comfort someone in pain. She sat down beside Elena, close enough that their shoulders touched, and in a whisper barely louder than breathing, she said the words she'd been holding back for months. She told Elena that she saw her, truly saw her, not as a prisoner or a case number, but as the remarkable, resilient, beautiful person she was. She told her that she believed in her innocence, that she'd started looking into the case herself during off hours, that she couldn't promise anything, but she wouldn't stop trying to find the truth. And then, in a moment of either courage or madness, Maya reached for Elena's hand and held it, and Elena gripped back like a drowning person grabbing a lifeline. What followed was the most terrifying and exhilarating period of Maya's life. They couldn't be together in any conventional sense. The power dynamics alone made any relationship inherently problematic, and the prison regulations made fraternization a fireable offense that could land Maya in legal trouble. But they found ways to exist in each other's orbits, to steal moments that felt like breathing after being underwater too long. Maya would walk past Elena's cell during night rounds, and they'd talk in whispers through the bars, sharing fears and dreams and fragments of their lives. Elena would pass Maya notes tucked inside library books during checkout, pages torn from notebooks covered in her elegant handwriting, poetry and observations and confessions that Maya would read until she'd memorized every word. They never touched again after that night in the library, but the emotional intimacy they built was more profound than anything Maya had experienced in her entire life. For the first time, she understood what it meant to truly know another person, to be truly known in return. Maya's investigation into Elena's case consumed her free time with obsessive focus. She reached out to the nonprofit where Elena had worked, interviewed former colleagues under the guise of researching a different case, obtained financial records through channels that were technically legal but ethically questionable. What she discovered made her blood boil with righteous anger. Elena's supervisor, a man named Richard Garrett, had a pattern of financial irregularities at his previous jobs, a history that should have raised red flags, but somehow hadn't. The timing of Elena's discovery of discrepancies in the books corresponded exactly with when she'd suddenly been accused and arrested. Maya found a forensic accountant willing to review the evidence pro bono, and together they built a picture of systematic fraud that had been pinned on the one person honest enough to notice it. She contacted the Innocence Project, provided them with everything she'd gathered, and watched as attorneys who actually had the resources to fight began to take Elena's case seriously. If this story has touched your heart, if you believe in the power of love to transcend even the highest walls we build around ourselves, Please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Your support helps stories like this reach the people who need them most, and it reminds us all that we're not alone in our struggles and our yearning for connection. The day Elena was exonerated came almost 2 years after that. First collapse in the prison yard, new evidence, expert testimony, and the discovery of Richard Garrett's offshore accounts had finally created enough reasonable doubt for the district attorney to agree to vacate the conviction. Maya wasn't working the day Elena walked out. She'd requested leave because she couldn't trust herself to maintain composure during the official release process, but she was waiting outside the gates in her civilian clothes, her heart thundering as the heavy doors finally opened and Elena stepped into the sunlight. As a free woman, they stood looking at each other across the parking lot. Two people who'd fallen in love in the most impossible circumstances, and Maya didn't know if what they'd built inside those walls could survive in the open air of the real world. Elena's daughter Sophia was there too, running into her mother's arms with tears streaming down both their faces, and Maya wondered if she'd been foolish to think there could be a place for her in this reunion. But Elena looked up from embracing her daughter, caught Maya's eye, and smiled with such radiant hope that every doubt dissolved like morning fog. She walked over with Sophia's hand still clasped in hers and introduced Maya as the person who'd saved her life in more ways than one. Sophia looked up at this stranger her mother spoke about with such obvious affection and asked with the direct honesty of children if Maya was going to be her mom's girlfriend now. Elena laughed, a sound like music after years of silence, and looked at Maya with a question in her eyes. Maya knelt down to Sophia's level and said that she very much hoped so, if that was okay with both of them, because she loved Elena with everything she had and she wanted to try building a life together, if Elena would have her. Before we reach the end of this story, I want to ask something special of you. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that love can find us in the most unexpected places and that hope can survive, even in the darkest circumstances, please leave a comment below sharing what this story meant to you or telling us about a time when love surprised you. Your words create a community of hope for everyone who reads them. The path forward wasn't easy or simple because real love never is. Elena had to rebuild her life from the ground up, finding work with a conviction on her record even though she'd been exonerated, reestablishing her relationship with Sophia, processing the trauma of 2 years of wrongful imprisonment. Maya left the prison system, unable to continue working in an environment that reminded her daily of how close she'd come to never knowing this love, and started training to become a victim's advocate. They went to therapy individually and together, working through the complex dynamics of how they'd met, addressing the power imbalances that had existed, learning how to be partners rather than officer and inmate. Some days were harder than others, full of triggers and setbacks and moments when the weight of what they'd endured threatened to crush the fragile, beautiful thing they were trying to build, but they chose each other every day, consciously and deliberately, building a love that was stronger for having survived impossible odds. Maya moved into Elena's small apartment 6 months after her release, and they created a home filled with Sophia's artwork and shared meals in the kind of ordinary happiness that feels extraordinary when you've lived without it. They planted a garden in the tiny backyard, teaching Sophia about growth and patience and how beautiful things can emerge from darkness given time and care. Elena eventually found work at a different nonprofit, this time with protections in place and people who believed in her, and she poured her experience into helping others navigate systems that seemed designed to grind people down. Maya advocated for criminal justice reform with the fierce passion of someone who'd seen firsthand how the system could fail. They weren't perfect, and their story didn't tie up neatly with a bow. There were still hard days when Elena woke from nightmares about being back in a cell. Still moments when Maya questioned whether she'd compromised her ethics beyond repair. Still complexities around how to explain their origin story to friends and family. But they had each other, and they had Sophia. And they had the hard-won knowledge that love, real, deep, transformative love is worth fighting for even when the whole world seems arranged against it. They'd learned that the walls we build to protect ourselves can also become prisons, and that sometimes the greatest act of courage is allowing someone to see us completely, vulnerabilities and all, and trusting that they'll choose to stay. Their love story became a quiet testimony to the truth that connection can bloom in the most barren soil, that redemption is possible even after the world has labeled you guilty, and that sometimes the person who saves your life is the one you least expect. Maya had entered that prison yard 3 years ago, believing she was beyond the reach of love, and Elena had entered those walls believing she was beyond the reach of justice. They'd both been wrong, and they'd both been transformed by having the courage to open their hearts despite every logical reason to keep them closed. In the end, love hadn't conquered all. It had simply given them something worth fighting for, a reason to believe that tomorrow could be different than yesterday, a reminder that we're all more than the worst thing that ever happened to us or the biggest mistake we ever made.